Are you able to differentiate between the different types of threat actors you'll need to know for the Security Plus exam? If not, well, you're in luck. We're having that conversation starting right now.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Greetings and welcome back to Security Plus here at IT Pro TV. And today we are discussing threat actors. These aren't really bad thespians. Too bad, because that would be great. But no. These are the hackers out there, the malfeasance in the technical world. They're looking to do your organization or your network harm. Wes, there are different varieties out there that we must be aware of for the exam.
Sure.
You're going to help us maybe figure those out today, huh?
Definitely. We're going to classify those, although I now have it stuck in my head because of you thinking about bad actors like a maybe we should do a Rotten Tomato, rating on every one of these
that'd be
actors.
great. Yeah.
That's right. So let's go ahead and let's talk about threat actors, all right? Threat actors, this is a classification of the bad people we have out there and kind of some information that you need to be aware of, like, for instance, the attributes behind them, whether they're internal, whether they're external, and we'll talk about some of them coming up, levels of sophistication, which in our first threat actors would be the lack thereof, right? This is what are known as script kiddies. And script kiddies, it's actually kind of a derogatory term inside of the hacker community. Script kiddies are called that because they're typically piggybacking off of the know-how, the talent, if you will, the experience of trained actors. For instance, you'll see hackers that put together pieces of software that help to automate some of their functionality. In fact, I can tell you this guy standing to the left of me has automated a lot of some of the stuff that he's had to do with various bash scripts, Python code and stuff, right? I don't really know any of that, right? But if Dan was to come over and say, hey, yeah, I got this script here, and it's going to automate some of the Nmap products or Nmap switches and stuff, all you got to do is enter your information here, and it goes through, and it does it, right? Now I look like I'm the best hacker or attacker in the world because I just ran an Nmap scan, and I've got all of these switches and stuff and options and arguments that I've added to it, when really all I was doing is clicking on the button of somebody that knew how Nmap was working and knew how to kind of put that information into some kind of script and automate the process. So hence, script kiddies are typically piggybacking off of other people's, work, if you will.
I would say the biggest idea here when you're talking about script kiddies is to emphasize the idea of their low level of sophistication.
Lack of knowledge.
Their lack of real know-how and skill. Yeah, they can grab a tool, just like Wes was talking about. Grab a tool off the internet, it does X. Cool, I ran the tool, it didn't work against that. I ran it again, it didn't work against that. I ran it, it worked, great. I have no idea how it worked. It just did, and I'm a hacker, yay, go me. Now, we all kind of start there because you got to figure this out as you go, but those that stay there and do this for fun or to impress their friends, a lot of times that will be their motivations.
Street creds.
Yeah, street cred for the skiddies, right?
That's right. So definitely something that you have to worry about. And the reason I put it at first is, Dan mentioned kind of that level of sophistication. They're probably at the bottom of the stack, not really having a lot of that know-how. But let's go ahead and talk about another type of threat actor that we have to worry about. And this is one, the enemy within, if you will. This is insider threats, and insiders are typically people that are working for your company or a part of your company. And a lot of times they're authorized users that have access to potential sensitive information, confidential information, trade secrets. They just decide that, you're not paying them enough, but maybe their competitors might pay them enough. So they grab that information or they mount an attack that causes some kind of destructive nature inside of the company and causes some harm to your network or your data.
Interestingly, and tell me if you agree with this, Wes, don't need a lot of technical know-how either. Much like the script kiddies, we were probably technically at least inclined. They like technology. These are people that could just walk into your server room and throw a glass of water on it and go, that's broken, see you later. That isn't technically an inside threat and doesn't take a lot of sophistication on their end either. Now, that doesn't mean they couldn't be though, right?
Yeah, definitely. And, I think about, Dan, like when you're doing penetration testing on a network or a setup, what's one of the hardest things that you have to do to gain access to the sensitive information, right? You have to kind of get behind that front line, right?
Yeah, getting past the security function or mapping my way through the technologies that they're using and looking for a usable vulnerability. That's typically a lot of the legwork and a lot of the harder parts.
Absolutely. But the insider, they've already got that legwork done. Why? Because they're already an authorized user.
Yeah.
Right? So all of those securities, they bypass very, very easily because they're already allowed on your
They've
network.
got a login. I had to brute force one or something.
Dan had to work really hard for that. All they had to do is type in their username and password, and now they've got access to potentially stuff that they shouldn't. So be aware of what the threat act, or the not the threat actor, excuse me, the insider. Thank you. The insider threat is, again, motivation on this one could just because they're disgruntled, right? That could be their mode or their modification. Just
like
behind
that.
it, modification.
Yeah, we're making new words.
That's
every
right.
day
I
here at
tell
IT
you, that's what we
TV.
do. That's their motivation behind the attack. It could be just the fact that they're disgruntled. Now, next up in the list is more of a political type, threat actor, right? Trying to bring some social change, right? Maybe some, human rights violations that they see, and they want to attack, if you will, some kind of, company, maybe for a philosophical or, again, some kind of political nature. That's going to be the hacktivist, and that's a lot of times is going to be their motivation. Again, they could be very, very sophisticated. Could be somebody like Anonymous that really is not just a single group, but a grouping, if you will, of a lot of very, very talented hackers, right? So hacktivist, again, I think of, the Cult of Dead Cow, I believe, is one that's out there, been around for a very, very long time.
They've been, ever since I started getting into security, as back when I was a skitty.
Yeah, sure. So if you want to check out something like that, I encourage you. They've got their own Wikipedia page, so you can always check it out on Wikipedia. You don't necessarily have to go over to their website, but they're an example of somebody who started out, hacking, if you will, for the purposes of some kind of social change. They thought there was a social injustice, and that's what they were going to mount their attacks to. So no hacktivists. Now, as we're kind of working our way up in sophistication, next ones on the list got to be very, very sophisticated type of threat actors. And these are advanced persistent threats. In fact, you can find a lot of these out there on the internet. Now, I'm going to let Dan help me out with the naming convention because I know that we've got a couple different places that you could see this. You could see it from FireEye and CrowdStrike. Dan, help me out. One's the more of like the numerical APTs, like APT28, and then the other one's got some funky names behind it. I can never remember which one is which.
I have the same trouble myself as remembering who does it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you might see APTs named in one way or the other,
Sure.
or maybe with both. Sometimes they'll associate, depending on what your source is that you're going to. So if you see APT28 or APT31 or whatever the case is, you'll know that maybe, those are Russian hackers, or those are Iranian hackers, and they have a group that has been put together, very high sophistication. They go after high value targets, and their goal is to get in, stay in, hidden, and in control of all these high value networks. That is the idea behind it. This is the whole idea behind red teaming, which is offensive type of security where you have good hackers come in, pretend to be APT, and see how well your network does against those types, because APT obviously is going to be such a threat to a lot of networks.
Definitely. Very sophisticated group, not just a single person, but group of people. And a lot of times they're going to have things like even governments backing them, which leads us into another type of threat actor. And these are the state actors. You might even hear them called nation states. And really, these are the governments that are behind, right? I think of things like the Iranian attacks that have gone on. I know there's been some North Korean type of attacks as well. But, we talk about entire nations funding, right? So they've got the resources, they've got the sophistication, they've got the backing. So think about those. These are very, very advanced threats, if you will. Again, I don't want to say advanced persistent threat, but again, they could be using each other.
I'm about to say, I think a lot of the APTs out there probably are also nation state hackers.
Exactly.
You'll see these groups because while maybe not officially connected to any governmental agency, working directly for in a lot of times. So you see them being used synonymously.
Definitely. And, we've talked before, like, let me go and bring up this next term that we need to be aware of, criminal syndicates, right? You'll see things like on the dark web, right, where you've got, think of things like, horrible things like Silk Road, it's been taken down, but this was a criminal organization that was working on the dark web for the purposes of probably usually some monetary gain. A lot of times they can be associated with an entire country, though. I know they're criminal syndicates, Russia. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a state actor. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're advanced persistent threat. It just means that they are a criminal organization working in Russia, right? You know, so just know what the criminal syndicates are.
And don't forget, like, think traditional criminal syndication as well.
Sure.
Mafias,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So Russian mob, Italian mobs,
Sure.
all these other different mobs, they're still making money. They're just moving into the digital era.
That's right.
In the digital age to make money like they used to, but using a computer.
Using a computer. Now they've got geeks. They've got the geeks on their side. And last but not least, this is in the list, but this really kind of works inside with like insider threats and stuff. Your competitors, they know you have some kind of trade secret, right? Let's think of Edison versus Tesla, right? You've got some kind of trade secret. Tesla was a great scientist. He was a very bad businessman. Edison, on the other hand, he was a really good businessman, maybe not such good on the science part, but he definitely had people working with him, right? So competitors could be the ones that are trying to steal your information, disrupt your business. They disrupt your business. They can pull ahead of you in the competition, but it could also be to steal your information likewise too. So these are some of the threat actors that I would be aware of when it comes to the exam, all the ones that we've mentioned right here. So definitely something that you should be able to classify and identify and compare and contrast.
Now, Wes, another threat that we need to be prepared for when it comes to our Security Plus exam is the idea of shadow IT. This is a really interesting concept. Could you break it down for us?
Definitely. So shadow IT can happen in a few different categories. So for instance, this could be hardware based, could be software based, could be cloud based. And I know Dan's got some examples of because in his time in systems administration, working for companies, has probably seen this before, right? So for instance, you have somebody that needs to use, I don't know, productivity software, but for whatever reason, the licensed, scrutinized, let's say Office 365, doesn't have the functionality that they want, all right? So they decide that they're going to go ahead and download LibreOffice, right? There's nothing wrong with LibreOffice, let's just be clear about that. But the problem is, according to the company, it is unvetted, untested, and it might run contrary to a security policy. Now, the goal here is to maintain productivity without relying on the IT team, right? It's one of the reasons we have like password reset self-help portals, right? So hardware, I bring in an access point. Accidentally, I bring in a rogue access point. I have my own cell phone now because I want access to my stuff, my emails when I need access to them. That's great. Can your company protect that phone with things like multi-factor authentication? Can you ensure that the device is encrypted, right? The goal was they were just trying to help, but the problem is it sits outside of the knowledge of the IT staff or the IT team that would be there securing it. Cloud, I think Dan has mentioned, and you've probably heard him in other episodes. If not, if you're following along sequentially, you will, about storage buckets, right? You talk about, well, let's think about developers. I'll bring you in here with the cloud. You know, it's easy to pull a container down, right? Oh, yeah. Right now, we like DevOps, right? We like development operations working together. What happens if those developers pull down some kind of container to use to create this environment for their runtime environment, and then they leave it orphaned? Now you got proprietary code sitting up there in the cloud that the IT team isn't aware of, and they can't secure it, and it's running contrary to security policy, and again, violates that CIA principle that we're talking about.
Or worse, they're using some technology inside of that container that has a known vulnerability.
Sure, good point.
They're just using it to support their developments.
Yeah.
Right? And they're not doing security. Their idea is to get some sort of functionality out of an application.
Sure.
If they're going to bring in these third-party technologies, it needs to be vetted. This is why we try not to go against company security policy. We know these technologies work. They are compliant with our security policies.
Right.
Let's try to stay away from using things that we don't know anything about.
Yep.
Because we don't know whether or not they're insecure.
And that really boils down shadow IT. Things that are outside of the sphere, the scope, the awareness of IT team that could be a violation of security policy, which is really what a security breach is. And that's definitely not what we want when we talk about things like just securing our networks.
Now, Wes, when it comes to threat actors, right, we're using this term threat actors because it's very descriptive. It lets us kind of know exactly what we're talking about. But for most people in their day-to-day lives, you watch the news, you read a newspaper, something to that effect, you hear just the term hackers in general. But that's not really a great way to go about this because there's some definitionally differences, or just some really good differences between different types of hackers we need to be aware of.
Absolutely. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Dan. I've known you for a good, quite a while now, right? As far as morals go, man's got him, right? He's a hacker. If I said that Dan was a hacker to somebody that is unaware, they would take that as a derogatory term, not knowing Dan. But his mindset, yeah, we could talk about both sides of the track, but for the most part, his mindset is the fact that I need to know what this does. I know what. In fact, let me not step back from that. I know what this does, but I want to know what can it do. That's a hacker's mindset. It's not a bad term, right? In the earlier days, the people that were the programmers were trying to hack systems to find out what they could do. We know what they are doing. We want to know what they could do. Look at the earlier days of integrated controllers, right? This is before we had what we knew as CPUs. They were called microcontrollers, right? But there were people like Gary Goodall out there that said, hey, this thing can actually be the brains of the entire operation and start processing code. It can control everything. And then we end up now pushing Intel towards the, hey, this CPU thing's like where it should be, right? These were the hackers of the day. You look at the Steve Wozniak, right? Not so much Steve Jobs. He was more the sales part, but definitely Woz. He is the engineer, the brains behind it. Looking at these boards, how do we put them together? Doing the old, help me out, the phone freakers, right? Being able to blow into the phone system with a whistle for certain...
Captain Crunch whistle.
Captain Crunch whistles, that's right, and for certain tones could actually manipulate the PTSN-based phone systems back in the day, right? Not necessarily doing it for malicious purposes, all right? Now, if you didn't own that phone system, you might say, I don't care, that is malicious, but the point is, an attacker is a malicious term. If they're attacking something, they're doing it for malicious reasons. A hacker doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing this for bad intent and purposes, right? So hackers versus attackers, understand there is a clear distinction between them. There's also different hacker types, right? There are black hats, all right? Now, black hats are typically somebody that is going to do this for some kind of malicious or malicious reason, probably make a little bit of money themselves, versus a white hat that is actually doing this to expose a vulnerability, a weakness, an exploit so that vendors can be aware of it. They can patch the systems up and then turn around and make their end users aware of it. And then there's the person that says, well, I don't know what I am today. How much money are you going to pay me? Right? They kind of sit on both sides of the tracks. Dan, do you have any good examples of people you've met that maybe might fall under this situation? I've seen like Moxie Marlinspike. He's a white hat up into the top. He was the one that discovered the WPS crack originally, right? So he made it public, right? Yeah. So that's kind of like the white hat that I'm thinking of.
I may be like the kid that discovered the kill switch inside of the WannaCry. He might be considered a great hat because he had done some black hat stuff,
right?
But he discovered this kill switch on the WannaCry, and he let everybody, hey, there's a kill switch. I believe that's how it went, if I'm remembering.
Sure. So he's kind of sitting on both sides of the tracks.
Yeah, he's doing one, he's doing the other, and a lot of times when we're just talking about gray hats, though, we're just meaning that maybe by day I'm a systems administrator, I do security for an organization, and at night I go to work for organized crime, or I'm stealing trade secrets for the opposite company that I work for. And giving it to them. So I'm working in both capacities. That's why it's the idea of a gray hat. It's got white and black.
The double spot.
Yeah, here it is.
That's right. Very good. So that's why we wanted to kind of set the stage for hackers. Don't think that those are bad terms. An attacker is a malicious threat actor of some sort that you would have to be aware of.
All right, Wes, let's talk about some threat vectors, avenues in which we could be attacked.
Yeah, they do call out, which direction, right? And we've got a series of them here. Your insider, right? Insider threat. That type of actor has direct access to your network, right? I told you, Dan's trying to work really hard to get into the system. The authorized user that's an insider threat already has direct access to the system. Could be some kind of wireless communication. We'll talk about some wireless attacks coming up as well. Email, this is a very big one, especially when you talk about phishing scams that go out. Supply chain, now supply chain is typically a third-party type risk when you've got a product and you also rely on another vendor for portions of their components, if you will, to kind of mix with your product. So supply chain, that's typically vendor management. Social media, right? Social media can be some of those avenues. We've seen that, especially given the fact that we're here in coming out of October going into November of 2020. Social media with the election and stuff, we can see that that's definitely something. Removable media, right? The USB thumb drive spread out in the parking garage, and then hopefully somebody can come in and get you to plug one of those in and say, "Ooh, I love that new little piece of malware that now is running rampant on our networks." Cloud-based solutions or threat vectors as well, because we rely on the cloud today. These are just some of the vectors, if you will, some of the points of attack that they can come from that we'd be aware of on that exam.
All right, well, there you go. Now you're apprised of the different types of threat actors that are out there, and you know the differences between the two. There's plenty of them for you to go over, so make sure that you watch this episode as many times as necessary until those distinctions start to become more and more clear in your mind so that you're successful when you sit that Security Plus exam. That being said, we are out of time for this episode. We've got more to come in the Security Plus series, so we hope to see you then. Until then, have a great day.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.